Welcome to the Edgework Podcast. This is episode number 5. Also, guys, known as the Trade-Related Reasons Podcast, because that's the kind of realm that we're in right now. We obviously got a lot to talk about leading up to this trade deadline. Zack Bodenstein with the fourth period, guys. Dave Pagnotta, Dennis Bernstein. So, guys, lots to talk about. Of course, a lot of more players sitting out for trade-related reasons. We saw Luke Schenn yesterday. We'll touch on him. Of course, though, based on last night, DB, we have to start with the Ryan O'Reilly Noel Acciari trade because we've seen 3 games from them so far in the blue and white, coming off the hat trick in his old building. Ryan O'Reilly, do you think this kind of shifts the line a little bit for the Leafs in terms of a first-round victory, perhaps? Is this what pushes them over the top, or does more still have to be done for the Leafs to move on?
No, they can. Look, they come close in the first round. They just never find ways to win. And Ryan O'Reilly is a guy who's won. It's as simple as that. But yeah, they're doing it for the first round and beyond, I guess. But look, you could talk about seedings, the 2-3, and let's go to 1-8. If it was 1-8, you know who would be the 4-5? Toronto and Tampa. So they're doing it specifically to match up for a team that has Braden Point and Kucherov and Stamkos and Cirelli. Right? That's what they're matching up for. And Ryan O'Reilly's the type of guy they've needed, without question. And he came through in a big way last night. Can't expect that in the postseason, but it rivals other teams with respect to if they want to play him, go 3 deep in the middle, or they want to put him on the wing. This was a necessary move, Dave, for Dubas and Shanahan.
Absolutely, because it gives them options, and it gives them. I mean, everybody's been focusing on Ryan O'Reilly, and yeah, the hat trick last night helped, but Noel Acciari is a guy that really benefits a bottom 6 contender. And he's been there before. He's got the playoff experience, and he's a gamer. So this was not just a good move to bring in Ryan O'Reilly. This was a good move to bring in both Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari. And I think right now Toronto's going to look to see what else they could potentially do and see if closer to the deadline or on deadline day at that 11th hour, if prices drop on certain guys and they have an opportunity to pounce on somebody that they can afford under their cap, then I think that might be the next thing that they try to do.
And kudos, Zach, kudos to the creativity to bring him in at 1-8. Like actually a 3-team trade in the NHL, like shocking. Like you see it every day in the NBA. You don't see it here much, but the creativity by 3 GMs to get this guy there for that price, that's impressive as well.
It's exactly what I was going to say. It does give them the flexibility because they're only paying the 1.85 for O'Reilly. Yeah. Acciari doesn't come in too expensive either. Both very valuable pieces for that team that needed depth. So, like Dave said, what's the next move? Do they move out some bigger contracts to give them some more flexibility? I mean, now they're kind of low on draft picks, but how do they make that happen, Dave?
Well, I want to point out one other thing. It wasn't just Minnesota that was in the mix. They talked to a few teams about potentially being a broker to make something happen, and there are other teams that are willing to do that. You have Anaheim, and Arizona obviously is the usual suspects because they've got so much cap space. But look for Vancouver. Vancouver's a team now that's put players on their LTIR. They're sitting at about 7.6, in and around 7.6 million in cap space because of LTIR space that they want to utilize to see if they can generate some draft picks and kind of fill their cupboard up a little bit. So for other moves that are looking to have a third team in the mix, don't be shocked if Vancouver is that third team as a conduit to help out some of the playoff contenders. And maybe Toronto goes back to one of those teams or to Vancouver and says, hey, we need somebody to eat up $500,000 here, at least in cap space, because the actual dollars aren't much. It's only $75,000 is what Minnesota's paying in actual hard cash. So we could see a team like Vancouver that has that, you got somebody on a low number. Dollar-wise, it's going to be even less. Don't be surprised if you see something like that happen, and don't be shocked if it's Toronto again.
And just imagine how much cap space Vancouver would have if they didn't have all those bad contracts, Dave.
Right. Well, you know what? They may have even more depending on the extent of the injury to OEL. Who's now out of the lineup on IR. If they realize that he's going to be done for the season, that frees up another, what is it, $5-6 million for them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, they certainly could utilize that. We remember a couple of years ago, San Jose got in on like 3 different deals where they were simply just a broker. They got like 3 fourth-round picks by retaining 25% of salary on some players. I know Nick Foligno was one of them. So there are those opportunities now, and it's a luxury because, obviously can't retain more than 50% from one team. So Toronto benefits from that. They get O'Reilly cheap. Can that open up something else? Now, the St. Louis Blues, of course, they were the team that traded away O'Reilly and Acciari. They also traded away Tarasenko and Mikkola. Seems like they have more moves to make, but Dave, could they be buying too? Because there have been reports that they're in on Timo Meier. This is a guy in his prime that is controllable because he's an RFA. Is that a possibility for them?
Well, they have the assets now to do it. I mean, adding 2 additional first-round picks kind of puts them in the ballpark of what the overall package will be for Timo Meier. They've also checked in on Jacob Chychurn. They've checked in on a few other players that have term on their deals to kind of augment their roster. They don't want to rebuild, and they don't want to necessarily retool. They want to reshape and be back in playoff contention next season, which is why Doug Armstrong is trying to figure out ways to kind of put all the pieces together. And that's why we're hearing Chychurn and why we're hearing Timo Meier as well. And we're likely to hear a few other players come out of the woodwork as well. I mean, I've been hearing Josh Anderson as a possibility out of Montreal. So, I mean, you have some players, and they want to kind of keep it in the mid-20s range. But you're going to hear St. Louis probably in the next 9 days poking around on some of the other guys that are out there and available. So, I look at St. Louis, and I'm not going to count them out. They're going to trade Ivan Barbashev, so they're going to get more assets for that, probably a second-round pick plus. I don't think it'll go to a first-round pick. I think they're hoping it will. But this is probably a deal that happens closer to the deadline as they try to up that marketplace. And then, look, they're taking calls on Colton Parayko and Torrey Krug, which is something we talked about last week. And I know Dennis and I originally reported that teams were calling about Parayko 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of interest in St. Louis in terms of what they could do. And does moving out a guy like Parayko give them a younger defenseman and free up enough cap space to make other moves in other areas? That's kind of what they're looking at right now for St. Louis.
Yeah, I was going to say, Zach, there's too many good players on that team to be a rebuild. Like, you've got Cairo, you've got Thomas on long term. If you don't, you've got Krug and Justin Falk, and if you don't trade Parayko, you've got Pavel Buchnevich who's been injured a bit. But there's too many good teams. This is not Arizona or Chicago. There's so many good players on that team committed to term that they should, like Dave says, with some tweaking, with some reshaping of the roster, they can contend. And you still have Bennington, who I assume will take the summer off, think, okay, the act's got to stop, and maybe I should stop more pucks next season. But it's been a really bad season for this team, but there's no reason why they can't be back. And they're not that far from playoff contention anyway, because the West isn't really that strong. So I agree. The right moves by Army, he can get this team, maybe not to a championship level very quickly, but certainly to a team that can make noise in the Central next season.
Yep.
Something to watch with Torrey Krug, too. Left the game yesterday, did not return. So will that play a factor? We will see. Speaking of left-handed defensemen, Dave, go ahead.
No, I was just going to reiterate that he's the difference between the two. Obviously, lefty Torrey Krug, more offensive, more defensive-minded, and righty in Parayko. So depending on what you're looking for, that's what you got with those two guys.
Definitely. Both guys have that pedigree as well. They've been there, proven, but also bigger cap hits. So that will obviously take some gymnastics to make that work. I was going to say, speaking of left-handed D, we're talking about Gavrikov. We've been talking about him for a couple weeks now. Dave, it seems like something's seemingly close with one particular team. There's some sort of holdup. So why don't you clear that up for us?
Yeah, the framework of a deal is in place between Columbus and Boston to get Gavrikov over to the Bruins. I don't know what the package is. I've heard that it's in and around a first and a third round pick. I don't know what Boston is giving up in this deal, but they need to clear out money in a separate move. Which means, A, Columbus isn't taking back anything significant from a cap perspective. And B, they got to find a third team. So whether it's a third-party team like we talked about earlier in Anaheim, or Vancouver, whomever, or a team that could benefit from a Craig Smith in their bottom six as perhaps a third-line center, there are teams that are looking, contending teams, playoff teams that are looking to do that. If they could perhaps shift him out west, in that environment, I think that's something that the Bruins are trying to do. There's some talk of Mike Riley perhaps as well, but it sounds like Craig Smith's name is most prominent right now as they try to free up cap space. So I mean, it's up to Don Sweeney at this point to make something happen, the GM of the Bruins. Columbus has made it clear they're not going to wait forever. So if a team swoops in with a better offer, they're going to go back to Boston and say, are we doing this today? If not, he's going to wherever. And we know that Edmonton's checked in, price is too high. We know LA checked in, price is a little bit too high. And a few other teams as well. Calgary checked in, not going to happen. So there are options, but they're limited. And I think Boston might be using that as a bit to their advantage. But they got to kind of get this going pretty quickly. As I said, it's the deal's there. It's just a matter of them freeing up the money before Gavrikov can officially become a Bruin if they can pull it off.
Seems like LA is close. I mean, they're like one trade away, right, from really breaking through in this Pacific Division race or this Western Conference race. If you're looking at the grand scheme of things, who do you want to see them go get? What's the chatter going on in Kingsland right now for the LA Kings?
Well, I think Chychurn is the natural, right? Because he would play left side. He's
Right.
an offensive player. He has size. It's a small defense. Other than Alexander Edler, they've got no size on the blue line. So that's a natural. But,
Yep.
like, I get it. Like, Bill Armstrong is holding the line for a big ask. Right? And Rob Blake is pushing back on it. I don't blame him, to be honest with you, because even with him, are they truly a championship team with him? They could win the division. Are they a top 4 team with the guy? No. With Chychurn, no. Gavrikov, if I'm this team, like if Gavrikov puts you over, then yeah, like Boston, they're doing the right thing. If they want to pay a first and a third, because this is it for them. Like Pasta, you better sign him. He's unrestricted. Bergeron's 37, Krejci's 36. That's a team that has to go for it. Rob Blake has the luxury of saying, you know what? It's too expensive, too rich. We have a better way to use that first-round pick than use it for a rental on a guy like Gavrikov. Because this is not the 2014 team where one extra ad would put them over. Do they need a left defenseman? Yeah. Are those guys an improvement? Yeah. I'd rather go see him wait in the offseason. Maybe the price on Chychurn comes down because now it's only 2 playoff runs as opposed to 3. Or go to Philadelphia and get Provorov. So there are other options. So while you could think, and I've said this a lot, the team that takes the one big swing in the West can get out of the West. There's no question. Like all of a sudden, Dallas is the 1 seed. They don't look so great. Vegas, I don't know about that. I mean, Brossoit and Aiden Hill, if they don't trade for Cam Talbot, the Kings have a path to get deep, but it's the question of price. So while I'm the one prominent media in LA saying, be aggressive, make the big trade, make the big swing, it's worked. Remember, he signed Danault. He traded for Arvidsson 2 seasons ago. Rob traded for Fiala. That's been a huge hit, except for last night when he went home and couldn't score. One more swing, they have taken. So it's like Rob's been too patient. Well, he's made some big swings and won on them. Like the one big swing in this trade deadline, would that make them more dangerous? It would, but he's being careful with his assets, and I get it. Like if it doesn't work, let's say they lose in the first round and they don't play good defensively, then you got to make that move. But I get the patience here. And maybe just wait it out till March 3rd. Maybe the prices drop, as Dave says. Right now, it seems like to be a seller's market. Maybe that changes as we get very close to the deadline. So I'd like to see one more move because they can clearly go deep. They can clearly win 2 rounds. They're as good as any of these teams. You watch them play, except for a really healthy Colorado, Zach, which I don't think that ever happens, and now Makar's out. Like this team could do some damage, but again, they're looking at the big picture. I think what they're looking to see is like next season, assuming they get back, so they've gone back-to-back in the playoffs, the next season, maybe there's one more big ad. So while there's opportunity, and Dave said it, and we've reported that they've been doing a lot of talking, I'm not sold that they're going to make this move for lefty right now before March 3rd.
But that's why Chychurn would make sense, right? Because he's got the term. It's not a pure rental. So there are options for LA. It's just a matter of if they're willing to take that big swing this year, because you make a good point. They could be patient. In fact, they probably should be patient, but we'll see with the LA Kings. More trade-related reasons. Talk this with Luke Schenn. He did not play yesterday for the Vancouver Canucks as we record this on Wednesday. Seemingly, Dave, he's going to be held out until he's moved, just like with Gavrikov and with Chychurn. So what are you hearing on the Luke Schenn front? Who's interested? What's the price looking like?
Well, they're asking for a 3rd-round pick for Luke Schenn. So we'll see if anybody bites on that one to give him up for effectively a number 7 on a contending team. So we're just kind of in waiting mode. We know the teams that have poked around. Calgary has most prominently been in the mix. But after their last loss and with everything going on there, I don't know if, and it doesn't sound like they're at the forefront of this, That was one of the first calls I made were to two people connected to the Flames to say, hey, are you pulling this off? And they're like, no, we didn't know he was sitting. So we'll see kind of what's happening there. It doesn't sound like Calgary, although they could swoop in. But typically when these kind of things happen, there's either a deal pretty much there, or you get two teams that are kind of bidding against each other and going from there. Like Gavrikov, we know it was Boston. And LA at the time we knew it was, or Chychurn rather, at the time we knew it was LA, and there was another team poking around. And you're just trying to get to that finish line. And then Bill Armstrong decided to pull a bit of an audible. And here we are. But with Schenn, it sounds like there are a couple teams kind of just battling to see if they could pull something off. Tampa was in on him a week or so ago. I was told they pulled out. So we're just kind of in waiting mode. And the other thing to consider here, which is good on the Canucks, his wife's due date, she's pregnant, is March 3rd, the trade deadline. So they're also trying to get him home to kind of be there, be with his wife, be with the family if she does pop early before a trade kind of goes down. But it's certainly, this one sounds like it's right there. It's just a matter of, kind of finalizing things. And honestly, depending who you talk to and depending what minute of the day, it could be a Winnipeg, it could be a Toronto, it could even be Boston, which won't affect the Gavrikov thing. But it's just kind of waiting mode right now because they're keeping this one pretty close to the vest.
So you're saying that they see Schenn as a 7, not as a guy who's going to be playing every single night.
That's what it looks like. I mean, he may slot into a third pair down the stretch, but this is a security blanket kind of addition to depending on the matchups. Yeah. You bring him in on a third pair, or you kind of sit him as a 7 and just have him kind of wait things out. He's done it before. He's a great guy in the room. He's got a cup ring. This is a caliber of player, the quality piece that you add to a team just to help them push them over the edge.
DB, what do you think about the Nashville Predators? This is a team that's been stuck in the middle for the longest time, and you actually touched on them a few episodes ago. But now Johansson's out. This team, they're kind of win one, lose one. What do they do in your mind? Do they buy? Do they sell? Obviously, they can't stand pat. It's been a tough little trip here for Nashville. Things are just very mediocre, is the best way to put it.
Oh, I try not to think about the Nashville Predators. I kid. They should sell. They're not a championship team. They're not close. They had a great playoff run last season, not in the playoffs, but to the playoffs, because Duchesne and Johansson had huge years. And guess what? They've regressed. And so what happened? So now they're out of it. Saros has been okay. He hasn't been great. A guy like Matthias Ekholm, I think you make calls on that guy. Like, he's not. Paul's not going to buy. It doesn't make any sense. Like the activity he did last season when he kept Duchesne and Johansson didn't trade him, re-signed Forsberg. You're right. I don't know how they get out of it, Zach, to be honest with you. Like, to get out of it, you know the deal in the NHL. You got to be really bad or really good. And when you're stuck in the middle like Nashville is, and remember, they went to the Cup final in 2017, haven't backed it up since. In some seasons, they've underachieved, and some they've overachieved. They're a middle of the pack thing, and the worst thing to be is a middle of the pack player. You'd have to move out some players with significant salary to rebuild this. And I don't know how you do it. I think he's stuck here with respect to this roster with some not so movable pieces. The one would be Ekholm, and you think you will get what, Dave, 2 or 3 assets for a guy like Ekholm right now.
Yeah, but the issue with him at this stage, and everybody's going to bring it up, even though these guys are, for what they do, kind of worth it and were worth the contracts, is $6 million cap hit or just over. So teams are going to use that against them. That's the same thing with like Erik Karlsson. Wow, it's such a high price for Erik Karlsson, making 11.5. Well, if you want a defenseman that's on pace for 100 points, that's the freaking price tag. So everybody bitches and complains about the money, and this guy's making this, and how do you make the money work? Well, they earned those contracts. So if you want that player, you got to kind of try to make it work. Like Kevin Hayes in Philly. There's a lot of interest in Kevin Hayes, but not at $7.25
million. Right, exactly.
So, is Philly going to eat $2 million of that? And now all of a sudden he's a $5.25 player. He's a hell of a lot more attractive, but now you got to pay for that. So, I mean, all of those things, Adam Henrique in Anaheim, exact same situation, 5 point something or other million. Teams would love to have him, but they want him at $3 million. Well, that's great. Yeah. I'd love to drive a Ferrari. I don't, but whatever. You got to kind of figure out how you're going to get to those points. And that's the sticking point now with Nashville with respect to Ekholm. Nito Niederreiter's name's floating around out there, but he's got another year left on his contract at $4 million. Is that an option for some teams? Would they look at Granlund at the center position, who has 2 more years left on his contract at 5 point whatever it
They're
is?
stuck.
Yeah, they're going to have to get creative, and maybe they use a third-party team in Anaheim or Vancouver or even Montreal to a certain extent, although I don't think they want to do term too much. You're going to have to get creative over these 9 days to pull something off, David Poyle, because it's tough sledding ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roman Jossi's not getting any younger either. They've got these guys locked in, DB, in massive contracts, like you said.
Yeah, so it's like there have to be some hard decisions made on what direction you want to go in the offseason. You're not going to do it by March 3rd, right? But like, what happens with this team? This is not a young team. This is not an overly abundant, talented team that has always had trouble scoring goals. Like, he's stuck here. I think there's some major surgery needed in Nashville, to be honest with you, and it's not easy surgery either, given the situation with the term and price on some of these players.
I'll throw out another player as well that we talked about. We actually reported first last trade deadline, nothing happened. I mentioned Adam Henrique in Anaheim. They got a goalie there in John Gibson with, I think, 4 more years left on his contract at $6.4 million. He's got a limited no trade clause, but don't be surprised if you start hearing his name a little bit more here over this next week or so. But that's going to be another situation where you're going to have to get creative. And what team is looking to augment their goaltending in such a significant way? Pittsburgh, maybe, but they don't have cap space. So you're going to have to take back probably Jari, or you're going to have to take back, as part of a deal, Kapanen as well. And that's just to make the money work. So how do you offset the fact that you're getting a guy that, according to ESPN, is still a top 10 goalie in the National Hockey League based on their survey with players? So
if he keeps making 51 saves every night because the team has no defense. I mean, you talk about trade related. I'd pull that guy out because every time he plays, he has to make 65 saves in a game because Anaheim's terrible defensively.
SRR, shot related reasons.
And let's be real. Dave makes a great point. Who's trading for a $6 million goaltender these days? It just doesn't happen. Because I could give you 2 examples in Vancouver and LA where a $5 million goalie, one's won 3 games for Vancouver, I think, and the other guy's in the minor leagues. Nobody's trading for a $6 million guy. And he's been solid. You can't tell. He's thinking with Gibson, you really need your scouts working on this because you can't tell the team's so bad defensive. Is he really that good, or is it the shot volume, or is he not good? So I just don't see it. I don't see guys trading for $6 million. It's the same situation as the other players that we mentioned. I don't see a $6 million goalie just going on the market without any retention or bad contracts coming back. Just not sure about that these days right now.
It's going to take, for a guy like Gibson, for example, to move, it's going to take creativity.
Right.
NHL GMs, for the most part, with all due respect, guys, and you know it, you're a little reluctant to be overly creative. So,
and here's the thing, Dave. Like, you want to be creative for Ryan O'Reilly. Do you want to be creative for John Gibson? Is this your best option? I don't know. I don't think so.
Right.
And that kind of did that you mentioned, like with Pittsburgh, let's say, and we're just spitballing here. Is that the Ducks? Does that make the Ducks better? Gets them out from under the contract. Does it make them any better? I don't think so. So it's yeah.
And that's what I mean. Like, you're getting, and this is just, we're just spitballing here, but Jari's a UFA and you got to make the money work. So you got to move 2 pieces. So they've been trying to move Kapanen to free up the money. So that's okay. Great. Now you've made the money situation work. Okay. Well, what are you giving me for the player now?
Like a legit asset. Not just these plugs, exactly. Give me the engine, not just the bumpers and the tires.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to free up, because Kapanen has I think 1 more year on his deal. So thanks for freeing up money next season. But now I don't have a goalie. And so there's all these different elements that come into play. And maybe guys just get too many headaches about this and don't pull the trigger because they're just like, the hell with this. This is too much. But it's the silly season, so you're going to hear these kinds of things happening.
But maybe it could work in the offseason just because, Jari is not under contract for next year. I've always been under the belief, the impression that Gibson is, maybe a top 10, 15 talent. It's just a matter, DB, like you said, of them not protecting him at all. But when you actually watch him, the guy's a stud. So I think he's from Pittsburgh too. Maybe they can make that work. But the goalie market is something that, that's a whole other thing because there's so many complications when it comes to who you trade for. We brought up James Reimer a couple months ago. DB says he's horrible, which, again, he's been horrible. So which goalies can realistically go and help teams out? There aren't that many, and the cap is a completely different thing. So, again, DB, we were talking about the LA Kings. Of course, they're not going to be going for a goalie now, you wouldn't think. It's not their priority. After they re-signed Phoenix Copley, they've got money tied up in a couple of other guys. So I'm just trying to think right now, are there any goalies that you guys see that may realistically go and help teams out?
Well, Jonas Korpisalo is out there in Columbus. I mean, is he a victim of playing for the Columbus Blue Jackets, or is he off? I mean, this was a guy that teams were looking at 2-3 seasons ago as a potential number one. So how's that shifted over the last couple of seasons? So, I mean, that's certainly a factor. And he's got a low cap hit as well. So for a team looking to kind of just stabilize that goaltending position, sure, you got him. If you're looking for a number 3, well, Dallas is willing to trade Anton Khudobin because they need to free up cap space a little bit to give him more flexibility. Patrick Kane. But we'll see what happens, there from the goalie side of things.
Talbot's playing again. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he's available. Vegas is looking around and poking there. So, I mean, that's another option. But in terms of guys that are on expiring deals, Korpisalo, Talbot, Reimer, I guess that's it. There's somebody else off the top of my head that I
Varlamov?
Well, yeah, but you got to think, I mean, Lou doesn't like to sell off. I mean, he's basically admitting that the season's done. So I would be a little bit surprised if the Islanders go in that direction, although they should. They should move out Varlamov. They should move out Scott Mayfield. They're pending UFAs. They probably get a pretty good return for Mayfield because he's got a low cap hit. But, I mean, other than that, there's somebody else who's totally just slipped my mind and I can't figure it out. And it will bother me because as soon as this show is done, it'll probably pop in my head. And I'm trying to believe.
But any of those players any of those goalies that you mentioned, they're not putting anybody over.
No.
That's like, you're not making a move for a goalie and winning a championship. Like, you're not.
Right. So there's no Patrick Watt trade that's happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, and the good news is if you need a goalie, I mentioned yesterday on the radio, the goaltending carousel is always spinning. Like, so if you're not happy with your goaltending once the season ends, you can probably go get another one. It's that type of situation with respect to goaltending. So, like, right in the moment, these guys that we mentioned, that they might be good caddies for somebody else and maybe share the net at best. It's not going to put you over. So I don't see the rush, Zach, for goaltending here over the next, 9 days.
Yeah, the goaltending carousel is always spinning, and we'll see if teams actually end up making moves. The Islanders are a whole other conversation that we could do a whole episode on because, man, it's just like, where are they? They never seem to quite figure it out themselves. So we can talk about the Islanders next week, of course, as we do lead up to trade deadline day on March the 3rd. Before that, let's talk about some things other than trades, things actually happening on the ice right now. The Norris race has been a pretty good one. Dave, you touched on Erik Karlsson earlier in the episode. Minus 200 right now to win the Norris. Pretty good competition behind him, though. So what are you seeing in respect to the Norris race, and who would you slap money on right now?
Yeah, I mean, the way that Erik Karlsson's been playing, I got to think he's going to be right up there without question. I mean, dude's on pace for 100-plus points. So, I mean, that's effective. Is he going to slide off a little bit like Roman Josi kind of did when last season when he was pushing for 100, then dropped to 90, and then a little bit less? But I mean, we'll obviously see, and then we got to figure out what the trade situation is going to be. I don't think he's getting moved. Edmonton, as of now, is out of that mix, so we'll see kind of what happens with Carl. But I mean, he's right up there. The other two guys that I'm looking at, I mean, if it wasn't for this guy having such a killer season, it'd probably be a Rasmus Dahlin, Josh Morrissey race here for the Norris on how well these guys have played this season. And Morrissey kind of doing it on both ends. I know he's putting up a ton of points, 60-plus right now or close to it. And I think Dahlin's at 60-something as well. But Morrissey's been holding the fort down as well from a two-way side of things. So, I mean, I put those guys in my top 3 without question.
See, I think the difference between Josi last year and Karlsson this year is Josi was in a race for the playoffs. And then, so the team had to play more
Right.
responsibly defensively. So maybe you don't like the last 20 games of the season, you're really focusing on your end and not going up the ice and scoring points. That's not the case in San Jose. If he stays in San Jose, and I assume he does because that's a big number and you're not moving him, and I don't get like the talk about Edmonton because that's not really the type of defenseman they need. Like, he's going to continue to play, Zach, and play the same way. He's going to get to 100 short of an injury, right? And here's the thing. The best defenseman in the league is Cale Makar, without question. But he's hurt. He's hurt again. He's not going to win the Norris. His points aren't there. He hasn't played enough games. And Morrissey and Dahlin will be in Nashville for the awards, and they'll clap when Erik Karlsson gets the Norris trophy, because that's the way it's going to lay up. It's as simple as that. Dave and I are voters. We're not supposed to close off like right now. If I was casting my ballot today, I'm not. It's Erik Karlsson, and I don't see any unless he got hurt. And I know they said, well, he did get traded at similar to. He'll have 20 games left at the trade deadline. Like, no matter what team he plays for, and he's going to go to a better team if he did. He's going to get those points to get to 100. It's his to lose, and I just don't see him losing it. So minus 200, it's probably fair value for a guy who we're all assumptive here that he's going to win the Norris Trophy.
I mean, being on pace for 100-plus points on a lottery team as a defenseman, that should he deserves an award of his own for that, right? I mean, it's been crazy what he's been able to do. I would always love to see an award for the best defensive defenseman, because now we have these metrics and these analytics, Dave, where we're like actually measuring how guys defend in terms of numbers. And, we talk about the offensive numbers. That's great. But I'm such a hockey nerd that I love the defensive metrics. And, a guy like an Adam Pelech or a Jacob Slavin, if they were in the mix for those kinds of awards, I don't know, maybe it's a stupid idea, but that's what I've always liked.
Well, they got, you have the Selke and whatnot and up front, which I guess goes for everybody. But, I mean, it's been so zeroed in on forwards for the most part, other than Slavin kind of entering the mix. But I wouldn't be against it. And that's why
Selke's for the best forward. Selke's for the best forward.
Oh, so what the heck was I thinking about?
I have no idea.
No. Which one was Slave? Was it Bing? Might have been Bing.
Yeah. Bing.
There we go. Okay, well, whatever.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be against it from the defensive side. That's why I was bringing up Morrissey's ability to kind of hold the fort down in his own zone. Like, you're putting up points, and he's almost at 60. I just checked. But you're also really stabilizing things in your back end. So from a defenseman perspective, he might be having the best kind of season, which is, I mean, DB brought up Makar. Yeah. I mean, he's doing it at both ends. So I would put him up there, no question. And that's why Victor Hedman gets some appreciation every freaking year, right? Because he's putting up points, but he's also a rock in his own zone. Yeah. So, those are the kinds of players that I kind of look at a little bit more. But if Karlsson hits 100 points as a defenseman, it's over, ladies and gentlemen.
There's enough awards. There's enough awards.
Yeah.
If the PA wants to make that type of award, that's great. There's enough awards. People criticize us enough for the voting, so I don't want to get criticized for another vote I might cast that is wrong according to people. So
you get criticized about everything.
That's true.
Everything. Someone's going to chirp me for wearing a T-shirt.
Yeah. Why are you wearing a light blue sweater? Exactly.
Yeah. What's going on here? You guys are wearing too much blue. Leaf fans, homers,
yes, of course.
Yeah, in LA.
I want to see DB rock that yellow and purple reverse retro LA King jersey. I think that would just look spectacular.
Oh no, I would get murdered, because then I would be a true Kings fan, right? If I did, I love the fashion. I love the fashion. But and even if I did, I couldn't wear it out. I could only wear it around the house. We knew you were a fan. Like, you sit in the press box and cheer when Kempe scores. Really? I banged on Kempe for 4 years. He doesn't really. I'm not his probably most favorite media member, but yeah.
That's why he avoids.
Hey, you're wearing a Devil's hat over there. This guy. The president of the team gives you a Devil's hat, so you wear it for 3 years. That's great.
Right. Showing support.
Exactly.
It's a flex, though. I mean, that's pretty cool. So, no, my point was just, if we're talking about the best defenseman and we can quantify defensive metrics, we should probably also take defense into consideration, because it's great that these guys are putting up 100 points. I don't care about plus minus, but if these guys are constantly abandoning their defensive responsibilities, I don't think they're the best defensemen in the league that year. That's just me, though. So that's always been the way I've thought about it.
Well, but let's be real here, Zach. San Jose's goal differential is minus 39, and Karlsson's -1. So it's not like he's just out there as a cookie monster, just stealing points and not playing defense. He's actually, the goal differential, when you look at that, when he's playing what, 25, 26 minutes a night? Like that's good enough for me. Like if he had all those points, it was a -40, then okay, well, what's he doing? But like when Ovechkin had 40 points and have a -20, he's still a factor. So I just think, like, is he the most complete defenseman? No, but when he's out there, he's not. I watched him play. He's not that bad defensively. He's not just, he's not cherry picking and stuff like that. He's been good enough to say, okay, this is, if he gets there, because there's such a gap between himself and the rest of the defensemen on points. Yes, it now leans towards that in this type of game, but I certainly think he's deserving given his season, given the state of the team right now.
Yeah, I'm not saying Karlsson isn't. I'm just saying, I'm speaking generally. I'm saying when we're voting on the Norris, this should be taken into consideration. But you're right, Karlsson has been good defensively. I've watched him a lot. So, I would totally agree with that. And I think, again, the plus minus isn't the best stat DB, but I think that is telling given the situation.
And to your point, I put Jacob Slavin on my Norris ballot more than once. Because you have to respect what he does for that team. And the team's style doesn't even lend itself. If he wanted to be an offensive defenseman, like they had one, and Dougie Hamilton go, we didn't need a player like that. So they got back Burns. So their style, he's never going to get big points, but you have to recognize that he's among the most well-rounded defensemen in the league, and there is currency for playing defense still in this league, even though there's more scoring in this league. So I have no problem with him. It's just that say, okay, does he do enough offensively to be a Norris winner? Maybe, possibly. It depends on what happens. If there was no Erik Karlsson, maybe, but I certainly think you want to recognize that type of play for that individual. He's a different type of player, but he's still, I think, among the top 5, top 10 in the league, depending on the season.
That's why I would like a separate award, but too many awards for DB to. Do they still do the ballots with a piece of pen and paper, or is it like is it online now?
It's electric. It's electronic now.
Yeah, we're digital now.
It's good to know. Good to know the NHL is kind of creeping up with the times. It seems like they're always last to kind of get there. So good to see that the NHL is certainly there. All right, guys. So trade deadline coming up March 3rd. Super excited for that. We'll have a couple of episodes before then. So we will certainly chat about all the trade chatter going on there. See if more guys sit for trade-related reasons. Maybe John Gibson will sit for his shot-related reasons. Maybe the Anaheim Ducks fans will have shot-related reasons for alcohol. It's a joke.
Moves.
Anyway, guys, so that's episode 5 of the Edgework podcast. Check out our best bets 5 days a week, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. We'll be live to bring you those. And you can check out all the stuff on the fourth period that Dave and Dennis bring, along with other contributors. So check that stuff out ahead of the trade deadline on March 3rd. Thanks for listening.